I would like to welcome you all to the round table of March 24th. And I want to start with a story. Very true story, and one that has a lot of meaning to me. The year was 1941. Neil, born in the Coney Island section of Brooklyn. Boy, this was a troubled kid. And I mean a troubled kid. Terrible self-image. Had no friends, except for an imaginary one named Shiloh. Socially inept, insecure. No one would speak to him. No faith in himself, no future, no nothing. This was, in short order, a loser. But on his 16th birthday, his father had purchased him a guitar. And he kind of imagined, maybe I can write music. Not sing it, he didn't have enough faith in himself to do that, but maybe, just maybe, he can write music. Well, he went to Erasmus High School with some very popular fellow students. Barbara Streisand, Bobby Fischer. What a class that must have been in Erasmus Hall. And he told everyone, I'm going to go out there and start writing. And he knocked on doors in Tin Pan Alley. For 7 years, folks, for 7 years, he knocked on doors. And he didn't stop. And at the end of 7 years, you know what he had? The biggest pile of rejections you can possibly imagine. He had nothing. But he was even more depressed. And he felt he was even a bigger loser because no one took him seriously. Well, his girlfriend at the time, and she would eventually be his second wife, Marcia Murphy, really felt bad for him and sat him down. And she gave him a story that her old Irish grandmother gave her when she was a child. I'd like to repeat the story. Mother used to tell her, the day you are born, the very second you open your eyes, there are 2 wolves inside of you. 2 wolves. One of those wolves is a wolf of depression, anger, envy, hopelessness. There's a second wolf, and that's the wolf of joy, hope, faith, love, success, purpose. And the second you open your eyes in this world, these wolves start to fight. And when you're sleeping, they fight. When you're awake, they fight. When you get older, they fight. The day before you die, they fight. They fight, and they fight, and they fight. Well, he said excitedly, who wins the fight? And she said, the wolf you feed. The wolf you feed. Before we leave today, I will ask you all, what wolf are you feeding? Neil understood that story. He understood it, and he understood it well. And he started knocking on doors again in Tin Pan Alley, and something strange happened. They started listening. His self-talk had changed. Neurolinguistics, you talk to yourself at 140 words a minute. His self-talk was changing. Not from, I can't, I'm a loser, I'm inept. But the self-talk became, I can make it in life. I can do something with my life. I'm capable of doing anything I want. And all of a sudden, when he walked in, that loser tag he held over his head disappeared. And lo and behold, someone bought a song from him called Sunday and Me, sung by Jay and the Americans. And then someone bought his next song. This was sung by the Monkees and made the top of the charts, called I'm a Believer. And then, when he tried to bring in a singer to sing a song he wrote called Solitary Man. He didn't like the way the singer did it. Oh no, totally unacceptable. So even though he never thought he could sing, he never thought that he could ever perform, he went up there and said to the singer, "This is how, in my head, I see this song." And he began to sing it. And the producers stood there staring at him. This kid can sing. They described his voice as gravel wrapped in velvet. And now he began singing his own music. And 130 million records later, I guess Neil Diamond really made it. What wolf are you feeding? Let me tell you about my first speaker and a good friend. I was 21 years old. Not you yet, Andy. We're getting to you. You're smiling too much. I wanted to check that. I was 21 years old. I had just purchased my first $49 polyester blue suit from Bond's men's store. It was blue with little gold sprinkles all over it. Put on a dark-colored shirt and a white tie so I could look like your typical low-class gangster, and I called him my first client. In Staten Island. And I was nervous, because my first client was a success. He was the art director of Greystone Press. He was a graphic designer for Reader's Digest and the Macmillan Company. For the next 6 years, he would be the writer and illustrator of the home improvement column for the New York Times. But my friend Ed spoke, every time we spoke, about his wanting to author a book. And when he said that to me the first time, I said, sure, everybody wants to write a book. Everyone talks about writing a book. No one ever does. But this wolf was a wolf that my friend kept feeding. And one day he did write a book. It was a children's book called Picasso, and it sold. And then he wrote a second book, the New York Times Home Repair Almanac. And then he wrote a third book, Tiling, a complete installation guide. And then he wrote his magnum opus. It is called Werewolf on Madison Avenue. I'm going to ask every one of you to read this book because you can see the film as you're reading it. In your mind, you can see reel by reel the film. This is a brilliant writer who keeps feeding the same wolf and producing more work and more work and more work. You ain't seen nothing yet. Ed Lipinski. Ed, get up here.
I'm coming. I'll be there.
We'll wait.
I hope you don't have to wait too long. First of all, I want to thank you for that sterling introduction, which I don't deserve, not at this point. I hope to earn it very shortly. Okay. Steve talked about how he first met me, so I will give you my version of the same story. I know you're videotaping this, so I'll turn around a second. My wife and I...
Could you stay midway?
Oh, yeah, sure, but I have to talk to these people too. I'm sorry, you're going to see my back.
You're doing fine.
Maybe it's the best part of me. Anyway, my wife and I just got out of the Air Force. Oh, that's why. Okay. My wife and I just got out of the Air Force, and I met my wife in Kansas, and we moved back to Staten Island. We bought a house, an old house, but a very nice house for us. And we got a call not too long after we bought the house from this salesman from Aetna Insurance, and he said, you people need insurance and you should think about it. So we made an appointment. He came over to our house, but he didn't come alone. He came with someone else. And he said, I want to introduce this fellow who's with me. He's just learning the business. His name is Steve Feldstein, and I hope you don't mind, but he's going to sit in on this presentation. So this guy came in and with Steve, and we came into the living room. My wife sat here, I sat here. This gentleman, this salesman sat here, and Steve sat on the corner. And he sat on the edge of the chair and just listened. A whole hour went by, and Steve didn't say one word. Can you imagine that? But anyway,
I can't imagine.
yeah, I know. But anyway, I didn't mention this salesman's name. I never saw him again. Steve took over from there, and I've known him for more years than I care to remember, more years than I care to admit to. And anyway, it's been a wonderful relationship. But Steve wasn't just a salesman selling insurance. He was also a good friend. My wife and I were involved in ballroom dancing, and we competed in the Harvest Moon Ball in Madison Square Garden. And Steve came to see it. He didn't have to, but he did come, and it was very nice of him. And not too long after that, Steve started selling insurance. He became $1 million salesman. He never talks about this, but he became a real success, and he had an office. He invited my wife and I to the office for a conference, and the office was down on Fulton Street. And you should have seen this office. It looked like they cleaned out the supply room and gave it to him. It had 2 rooms, and neither room had a window in it. He had a secretary, and he had this other small room. And but it was an advancement for him, because after all, now he had an office and he had a secretary, and he was moving up in the world. Sad to say, my wife and I split up, and she moved down to Florida, but Steve and I still remain friends. And about that time of our separation, my wife and I moved to Brooklyn, and Steve kept in touch with me, advised me, and he invited me to his next office. And you should have seen this office. It was on the west side by the Downtown Athletic Club. It had 2 rooms, and one room, the first room he went into, was big enough to play soccer in. The second room was his office. It had this magnificent view, window of the New York Harbor and the Statue of Liberty. And since I was going through a divorce, I was a little bit troubled, but Steve advised me, gave me good counsel, and because of him, I'm more or less financially stable. I say more or less because when I tell you the story of publishing, you're going to see that it's a little more shaky than I admit to. But anyway, and then Steve moved out to his castle, which I haven't seen yet, but anyway. So I want to thank you, Steve, for your wonderful introduction, which I didn't deserve, and I'm going to tell you why in just a minute. And for your counsel and your friendship. Now, we just talked about Steve's favorite subject, himself, and now we're going to talk about my favorite subject, me. And I'll tell you about what I did. When I got out of the Air Force, in college I studied writing, and I also studied psychology. And I took a little bit of art courses. When I was in the Air Force, I studied a little bit of art. When I got out of the Air Force, I realized that's what I wanted to do. So I got into the art field, and I worked at Greystone Press, which is a very tiny press. So Steve makes it seem like a very prestigious position, but it really wasn't. But it was a start. And I went to school at night. I went to the School of Visual Arts 4 nights a week under the GI Bill. Even though I had a college degree, I had to learn art, so I started to do that. And I studied art, and Steve mentioned one of my books, which I will show you now. I know, you're in the camera, I'm getting a close-up here. And this is a children's book. And I wrote it and illustrated it. I won't pass it around because it's kind of old, but you can, to my surprise, it's still available on Amazon.com. And so then I started writing, and that was the last book I did, but then I got very involved in the art world. I became a graphic designer. I worked for magazine management. I then went to the Macmillan Company, and I went to Reader's Digest, Hardcore Brace, and I learned about the publishing world. And I was mostly a graphic designer, but at the same time I was trying to become an illustrator. And I became a technical illustrator, which meant I illustrated car mechanics, home improvement, and scientific and technical subjects. And I got one very plum client. I used to illustrate for popular science, popular mechanics, but my big client was the New York Times, and they had 2 columns on home improvement. one which appeared on Thursday and one which appeared in the regional section on the weekends. And I illustrated for both of them for many years. And I had a byline of Ed Lipinski, illustrator, but I didn't write for them, I only illustrated. And the Times started falling on hard times, and they dropped the Thursday column, which was a big column, and then they had the regional column, and I was illustrating that, but then all of a sudden the writer for that quit, and they didn't have a writer. So I took a daring move, and I stepped up to the plate and said, let me write the column, because I know home improvement. I worked in the theater. I was a stage carpenter in the theater in college, and I know about construction. So they said, okay, we'll give you a chance. Now that was a daring move for me to take because I didn't have a computer, I didn't have a typewriter. I was going to step up and be a writer. I didn't have the tools to be a writer. So what I did was, for the column, I wrote the whole column out in longhand on paper. Then I went into Kinko's and I copied it out onto the computer. I rented the computer, typed it out onto a small disk, and then I would go into the Times building and plug it into their computer, and my column was there. I got accepted, and they liked my work, so every week I would write the column and illustrate it. I had a double byline: Edward R. Lipinski, the writer, and Ed Lipinski, the illustrator. I think I was the only one in the history of the New York Times who had a double byline. After a while, I had enough money to buy a computer, and I bought a Mac. And it had the amazing capacity of having 6 megabytes of hard drive and 4 megabytes of memory. Today we're talking about gigabytes, but that computer at the time was the state of the art. Well, anyway, I was writing for 5 years the home improvement column, and a book came out of it. I'll show you the book now. The Home Repair Almanac. I think it's still available on some venues, but it's kind of dated. Not only did I write it, but I did the illustrations. So anyway, that came out of it. And then after a while, Sterling Publications approached me and asked me to do the tile book, and I did that. I also did editing jobs for Stanley. So I was an illustrator and a writer and a designer. Well, that was going really good, but then the bottom dropped out. What happened was the New York Times fell on hard times, and they started competing with the internet, and they realized that they had to stop some of their lavish publications. So they dropped all the freelance columns. They dropped my home improvement column, they dropped the cooking column, they dropped the chess column, and every other column they had. By then I had a computer, a pretty good one, and I thought maybe suddenly I had, after writing for 5 years, I had the idea maybe I'd like to write a novel. I suddenly had an idea for novels. So I sat down and wrote a novel. And I got an agent. And the agent pitched the novel to various publishing companies, and guess what? It got rejected. So I wrote another novel, and I told my agent. She was very happy with it. She pitched it to the publishing companies, and it got rejected. This happened 3 times. And I was working on the 4th novel, and then my agent wrote to me and said she was getting married and she wasn't going to be in the literary business anymore. So I put the novels on a shelf, and I'll show you what I wrote them because it's very interesting. At that time, we saved the novels on these devices. CDs. Yeah, okay. This will come back to haunt me. So anyway, I had 4 or 5 novels on CDs, and I put them on a shelf on my mantle. Now, for some of you people who are really good house cleaners and housekeepers, you probably would throw away things that haven't been used for 6 months or a year. Well, I didn't do that. I kept the novels on the shelf in my apartment. And I figured, well, they're not doing anything. Maybe someday I'll use them, or maybe not. But anyway, I just kept them there because they weren't taking any trouble. They were just gathering dust. Well, then what happened was after I started to try to sell my novels, and I tried to do other things. I started to get into acting, and I figured I had enough of the literary career was down, graphic arts were down. People weren't by illustration as much, so I got into acting, and I did some acting. I got a few assignments, I did some commercials. I got a chance to do acting in a travel log, and we went to Egypt for that. I didn't get very much money for it, but I got 12 days in Egypt, all expenses paid, and we went up and down the Nile, and it was really good. So the next year, I figured that's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The next year, I said, why don't I do something on my own? So I decided to go to Istanbul. And I went to Istanbul, but I also took my sketch pad with me. And from the trip to Istanbul, I wrote an article which appeared in the American Artist magazine on the spot sketching. And that paid for my trip. That was, again, another once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. And so then, I'll show you something else. This may amuse you. Which has nothing to do with writing. If I have anything, oh yes, here it is. Yes. One of my minor achievements, which I call a portrait in ugliness, I made the cover of the New York Time magazine. No talent involved, no writing, just an ugly picture. So anyway, life went on like that, doing acting, doing freelance jobs, and doing things of that sort, but nothing major. And then the pandemic struck. And I was home during the lockdown, and I thought to myself, I really want to do something. What can I do to achieve something, to feel as though I have purpose in life? And that's when I remembered my novels. I had a flash of inspiration. Maybe I could self-publish my novel. Now let me just tell you a little bit about publishing, because publishing has changed over the years, over the decade. In the 20th century, publishing was very big because there weren't many avenues for entertainment. If people wanted to go out for a night, they had vaudeville, and then motion pictures came in, and they were very small and silent during the silent era. So what people really did was they read a lot. They read books, they read magazines, and magazines had serials in it. There were a lot of magazines. There were magazines for westerns, magazines for literature. There were magazines for suspense. Dashiell Hammett started doing, who wrote The Maltese Falcon, started doing magazine writing. Some great movies came out of magazine writing. Stagecoach, which was probably the first great epic motion picture with John Wayne, Claire Trevor, and Thomas Mitchell, came out of a story by Ernest Haycox called Stagecoach to Lordsburg. Casablanca, one of the great movies of 1943 that won the Academy Award, came from a movie that appeared in the short story that appeared in the Saturday Evening Post called Everybody Goes to Rick's Place. So there was a lot of writing done, and many publishing companies actually went out and looked for writers. Ernest Hemingway started writing short stories, and he was a reporter for a Midwestern newspaper. He started writing short stories, and Maxwell Perkins from Scribner's actually found him and said, would you consider writing a novel? And he did. That was The Sun Also Rises, 1926, that was published. But publishing, the way publishers used to work is they would get a new writer, and they knew that just launching a new writer took time and took some money. So they didn't. So what they would do is they would take the writer and they would nurture him or her, and they realized that they couldn't sell many of the writer's novels the first year. But what they would do is they would have a press run. That's where they start to print, and they would make it a major press run. Now, if you've ever been to a press run, I used to be an art director, so I used to go to them. It takes a whole day to set up the press. You don't just put the type in. You have to print the type, and then you make mechanicals, you make plates from it, and then you put the paper on, and then you run the press. And they found out it's easier to run a press of 100,000 copies at one time than to just run 10,000 one year, 10,000 the next, 10,000 the next. But you have a whole bunch of copies, and then you put them in the warehouse. So the first year, the writer sells maybe 10,000 copies. You have 90,000 copies still in the warehouse. And then the next year you sold another 10,000. Gradually you build up. And that way they keep the unit costs down. And that's the way publishing used to be until about 1970. And then it changed. And the reason it changed is because the federal government stepped in. And the federal government can screw things up like no one else. And that's what they did this time. The IRS came in, they looked at the 90,000 copies in the warehouse and said, those are taxable. They're taxable assets. And the publishing company says, well, we're not making any money on them. And the IRS said, yes, but it's just like having machinery in a factory, taxable assets. The publishing companies realized they had to get rid of a lot of those assets, otherwise they had to pay taxes. And that's why when you go into a bookstore sometimes, you see publishers' remainders. That's what's happened. The minute the books sell out, they get rid of the stuff in the warehouse. They don't have to pay warehouse fees. So it became harder and harder for writers, particularly fiction writers, to get their work published. And so that's why my books weren't being published. But then about the turn of the millennium, something changed, and a new type of publishing came in, and this was self-publishing. It gave an opportunity for writers, new writers, to actually publish their work. And I'll tell you a little bit how that works. Let me show you, and I'll also give you my press kits. Oops, sorry. The way it works is that because of the internet, you can go to a lot of small presses have started up, and I'll show you my book in a few minutes on how that happened. But anyway, so what a writer could do was approach a small press, and these people would publish the book, and they would put it on the internet. Now that would seem like a writer's dream come true, but there are some caveats and some disadvantages to this, and I'll explain them in just a minute. But anyway, so it became possible for writers to actually get their work published. Now, self-publishing is not something new. It was advanced as early as 1947. There were two publishers, Vanguard Publishing and Durance Publishing. And what a writer could do is he could approach these publishers and say, they were basically printing companies, and they say, I'd like to publish my book. And what these companies offered was, okay, how many copies do you want? And they would publish, they offered very little in the way of editing or design, and you'd get a book, and then someday a delivery truck would pull up to your front house, ring the doorbell and say, where do you want your crate of books? And you put them in your living room. Now, this brings up an interesting question. You've probably heard the old conundrum, if a tree falls in the forest and no one hears a sound, did it ever make a sound? Well, in publishing, if you publish a book and no one reads it, did you really publish a book? Well, with self-publishing now, these small companies could publish a book and print it and put it on the internet. So you did get some exposure, but it's not quite as good as all of that. Part of the reason why self-publishing can come about is because another innovation came about called publishing on demand, or POD. Instead of having to publish 10,000 books, they could publish as few as 5 books or 10 books or something, and they could put them on the internet. And when they sold out, the Amazon or Barnes & Noble would call up and say, hey, I need 5 more books, and they could publish them with the books. So it would seem like it's a publisher's dream, but not quite. Because my book has published, and I will show you the book now. I think Steve already showed it to you. This is it. Wolf on Madison Avenue. Publisher's dream. I had this in CDs for many years, and I finally got it printed. And it was published by Outskirts Press, and it's on Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. But let's face it, this is probably the first time many of you have seen me, and even if you've met me before, you probably didn't know my book was on Amazon.com or Barnes & Noble. So even though the book is there, the public doesn't know it's there. And so if I'm lucky, maybe I'll sell 500 copies this year. I had to get my book to go beyond that. Now, having the book on Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com is considered to be what they call virtual presence. In other words, it's in cyberspace. But I wanted to have more than that. I wanted to get a public presence, a brick and mortar presence. And that's what we come to now. In order to do that, I had to market the book. And now it gets very complicated and very expensive. These are my handy dandy press kits. And I know they're kind of amateurish, but I'll tell you about how I have professional ones coming out. But that's the marketing story. Fortunately, there aren't too many people here, so I have enough for everybody. Take that.
Thanks.
Here, just and okay, these are my press kits. So anyway, what I did was somehow I got in touch with a marketing company called Reader's Magnet, and they said, okay, you want to get your book into the stores. In the old days of publishing, the big publishers would go to the retailers like Barnes and Nobles, and they would make a deal. And they would set up a presence in the store. There are two types of presence in the store. One is called strategic presence or strategic positioning, and the other is called special positioning. Strategic positioning is this. When you walk into the store, right immediately there's a table with books on it. And then there's another table and another table. The books that are going to be the hottest ones will be on that first table. That's the strategic positioning. And then the other ones, you have to pay extra for that. Now, special positioning means if you want to get a book, and let's say it's a horror book or humor book, you go to a special section. Oh, there are the books on horror. There's the books on suspense. There's the books on history. That's special presenting. And the bookstores automatically do that for you. Now, to get your book into a bookstore, how do you do it? Well, the marketing people told me, here's what you got to do. They have book fairs throughout the country. They had a Tribeca book fair, and my book was featured in that. They have the New Orleans book fair, which is happening this month. My book will be featured in that. They have the big ones, the three big ones, the Los Angeles Book Fair, the Chicago Book Fair, and the International Book Fair in London. Next month, I will be at the Los Angeles Book Fair to sign books. To get your book into the book fair, now it starts getting expensive. They said it'll be about $6,700. So so write a check and put my book in the book fairs. But they said that's not enough, because when you go to the book fairs, it's a big room, and there's 1,000 books here, 1,000 books here, 1,000 books there, all over. And everyone comes to these book fairs. There are film producers, there are other publishing companies, and there are the retail outlets, and also the libraries. You ever wonder how books get in the libraries? Well, they go to the book fairs. What's going to make any of these people look at one book or another and pick it out? Well, they said, what you really need to do is you need some publicity. And so they said, one thing you could do is advertise in the trade magazine that's Publishers Weekly. And the first page on this press kit that I gave you is an ad that this is in full color, Publishers Weekly. That's another $4,000. And I said, well, also you want to get your name in before the public. And one way to do that is to be on the Kate Delaney show. Now, Kate Delaney, in case you haven't heard, I hadn't heard of her before, but she's a radio talk show host. She claims to have an audience of 9 million viewers, 4 million on the internet, and so we could do an interview. That'll be another $1,600. And I did that, and so I don't know when it aired. I think it's already aired or it's about to air. It will also be on YouTube, and it was a wonderful interview. I enjoyed working with her. Even though I never met her, we did the whole thing by phone, and it was a wonderful interview. And then they said, well, another thing you could do too is you want to get your book into an audiobook form. And my book will be in an audiobook form very shortly. By the way, they also said what you really have to do is have your book reprinted with your picture on the back. And that's another thing I had to pay to get. Yes, another thing I had to do to get headshots. So this is the newest cover. This book will be available, is available now on Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com. It's also, will be in the stores very shortly. And if you buy it, it has my picture on the back. They said also you want to get a hardcover version. So this book is available in softcover for $11.99 and hardcover $26.99. You may wonder why it's $11.99 and not just $12. Well, some of you who've worked in retail know that. It's called a 4-digit entry number. Now, I used to work in the hotels and selling theater tickets. And let's say someone would buy a theater ticket for $99. If you type in the credit card number, 99, you're not charging that person $99, you're charging them 99 cents. To get the $99, you have to charge 9900. That's a 4-digit entry number. Now, when things get hot and heavy and very busy, cashiers often forget to type those 4 numbers in. So rather than just type in 12 for $12, you type in 1199, and that gives you the 4-digit number. Otherwise, if you don't get that in, and as we were told when we were selling theater tickets, if it's $99 and you only type 99, you charge the customer 99 cents, and the retailer, the clerk, myself, would have to make up the difference. Don't want to do that. So anyway, that's why you have the 4-digit entry number. So anyway, this is what marketing is all about. The problem is, all of this stuff that I'm spending money on, and that I have spent a lot of money on, by the way, you may wonder, $6,000 here, $4,000 here, $4,000, how much is this gonna? It's over $35,000 within the last 3 months. A lot of money. And is it worth it? Well, there was an industrialist in the early 20th century named Lord Lipinski. He was an English industrialist, and he said something very telling. He said, half the money I spend on advertising is wasted. The problem is I don't know which half. And that's what this is all about. You just have to put your face out there and put your name out there and hope that you will gain, what they say in marketing, you hope that you will gain traction with the public. And whether or not all this is paid off yet or not, I don't know. It's going to take months, as my marketing people said, months before the book starts to sell. We'll have to see whether or not it will appear in the bookstores. I will get some idea as to whether or not all of this has come to fruition. And when I am in Los Angeles next month, I'll be going out for the Los Angeles Times Festival of Books. And I'm supposed to have a scheduled signing, and I'm on the internet, and I'm also on YouTube. I don't know where, but they tell me I am. I wish I could be more positive about what's going on, but anyway, there's so much going on, and they're telling me everything is happening. I haven't been able to keep up with it. I haven't even been able to keep up with the money that I'm spending. But anyway, so when I'm out there, I'll see if there's been any reaction. I'll get to meet some people in the industry. Now, in addition to doing the books, my marketing people have also told me that it's not enough to just do a book anymore. You got to do the audio book. So this book here will be made into an audio book. Another $5,000. But anyway, but then I will get more money from the audio books. I only get about 15% from sales of these books, but I will get about 50% from the sales of the audio books. And then they said, another opportunity for you is motion pictures. And the motion picture companies are dying for content. Ever since the pandemic, we've had people not going into the movies anymore. They've been streaming, going on the television. And because of streaming, there's constant need for more content. And the movie companies are looking for content. They're looking for stories. And they said, werewolf, they love werewolf stories. They said, if you can believe that. But anyway, but unfortunately, it seems like, from what I can gather, movie producers don't know how to read, or else they don't have the time to read. So there are two ways you approach a movie producer. One, since my ads have appeared, I've been getting phone calls from agents. One in Chicago, another one I think, another one in Seattle, and someone else from somewhere I don't know. They said, okay, movie companies will pay as much as $500,000 for a movie, for a story. Well, yeah, they may pay that much, but they may only pay $5,000. You never can tell. I've noticed that agents like to throw money around. You can really make big money if you do this and this and this. So what they would want me to do is, first of all, you write a treatment for the movie. Now, the treatment basically a synopsis of the story. Then you have to tell what it's like, what other movies were similar to it, but also why it's different. And then you have to write the screenplay. Now, I've written a couple plays, but I've never written a screenplay. I suppose I could do it if I studied screenplay writing, but I don't want to get into writing for the movies. I want to write novels and I want them to be published. And so I turned these people down. The other approach, which is in the works now, is my marketing team said, we can make a trailer of your movie. Now, I don't appear in a trailer, but basically it's a professional trailer. Steve asked me to bring it with me, but it's not ready yet. They had finished it, but then they put the wrong cover on. They put this cover instead of this cover, so they're redoing it. They do a trailer, and that's distributed to the movie companies. It's only about a minute long, and I got to not interview, but read or hear the voices of the actors who were going to do the voiceover, and I got to choose the one that I thought was the best. So anyway, that's going to be happening. Whether or not any of this will come back to repay all the money I spent, I don't know. But I'm not just trying to sell a book, although that's what I'm going to ask you to do today. I'm trying to start a career as a writer. I have this book, it's already in print. My next book, Visions of Destiny, will be coming out next month, and it'll be ready for the Los Angeles Book Fair. Then I have a third book that my publisher really wants me to get, Spectres from the Past, which I've almost completely written, which will come out maybe by the summer. And then I have another book which I'm working on from scratch. Now, we come to your favorite subject, is you. What do I expect from you? I would like you, I don't want you to open your wallets, I don't want you to be paying me $10,000 to invest in my company, because I don't have a company. My company is me, and my business plan is very simple. I write books, I get them published, and I hope to sell them. What I'd like you to do is to go online. Now you see over here my little press kit. By the way, I will be getting a better press kit. My marketing company has put together business cards for me, postcards, even a poster. But that's not going to be ready until the Los Angeles Book Fair, so I have to make this one up. I want you to go online, go to Amazon.com, type in author, Edward R. Lipinski, and this book will come up, and buy it. I'm not going to get very much money from it. I'm not looking for the money right now. What I'm looking for is to generate sales, because if the book starts to sell on the internet, it's another selling point for people to want to put it in their stores and to generate, as I say, traction. Now, if you look at this press kit, I'll just borrow this one. It's got my picture, for better or for worse. It's got, you may wonder about how good the book is. There's a synopsis of the book, and there's a review. I've paid to have reviewers, another $3,000, $4,000 to get reviewers. I used to think that with a reviewer, they'd go in the bookstore, pick up the book, or you could mail a book to the reviewers, and they would review the book. Now, that's not the way it works. The way it works is that there are independent reviewers, and you have to pay them to read the book. Now, you're not paying them for the actual review. You're not giving them money and saying, if I give you a couple thousand, will you give me a good review? It doesn't work that way. The reviewers are independent. I've got 7 reviewers. 5 of the reviewers have given me 5-star ratings. I've given you 1 review here. 2 of them have given me mediocre reviews. Now, if I was paying for them, I would get 7 really good reviews. So I know they're independent, and they've given me good reviews. The next book hasn't been reviewed yet, but I will probably be reviewed. So I want you to go online and buy the book. You can wait till it's on audio. Maybe you can buy both. But anyway, so that concludes my presentation, except for one thing. I thought we'd finish this whole thing with some fun and games. Now, if you look at this press kit, you see that this is my business card. Now, this is my business card that I had many years ago as a writer and illustrator. If you turn the business card over, you come to a blank surface. I'd like you to write, if you want, I'd like you to write your name on it. Now, over there is my hat. You're getting an idea what I'm going to be doing. And I have this book. I thought maybe we'd have a drawing for the book. One person will walk away with a book. If you write your name on the back of the card, we'll put it in the hat, and I'll have someone draw for it, and you get a chance to win a book, for better or for worse. Everyone is eligible. If you didn't get a press kit and you would like to sign up, I have other cards. 1, 2. Now you have to use the business cards that I provided. You can't put your own business card in. Now I'll tell you why not. Because your business card may be different. It may be bigger. It may have a fuzzy texture. And so someone reaching in would pick that business card. This way we have a level playing field. Anyone else? Oh, good. We actually have people who want to get the book. I hope you'll be this enthusiastic when it comes to actually buying it. Okay, everyone? Okay, I'll shake it up. Steve, you're the only one who didn't put, oh, no.
Yeah, I did, actually.
Yes,
Oh, you did?
through his
Yeah,
wife.
I'll ask Davis. Go ahead. Wait a minute, let me just mix them up.
I want the business card back, don't I?
Okay, wait a minute.
My God, it's you.
I already have the damn thing. Pick another one.
Make another day.
That's good, honey. You always win now.
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
And it's me.
It's rigged.
Okay,
The fix is in.
why don't you, lovely lady over here.
That is funny.
Deborah. Oh.
Okay, Deborah.
Way to
There
go,
it is,
Deb.
right there.
Thank
Ladies
you
and
very
gentlemen,
much.
ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for your kind attention. Steve, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. I hope to see you. By the way, I'm not, as I say, I'm not just launching a book, I'm trying to launch a whole career. Whether or not all the money I've spent is worth it, I think it is, because even if I don't get the money back, I've learned a lot, and it's been a wonderful experience, and I hope to continue it. Ladies and gentlemen,